yourself waking up one day on a different planet where everyone is speaking a foreign language. You're lost, confused, and overwhelmed. That's exactly how some people with disabilities are trying to navigate in a world that's not made for them. One that's filled by others who constantly look down on them and make them feel inferior. If you think that was a bit of a stretch, I'm here to tell you from personal experience that this is precisely how my sister has been living for the past 18 years. She was diagnosed with autism, which occurs when a child has trouble communicating or understanding strangers. This means that she's isolated, detached from all social interactions, but it's so much more than that. My name is Nour, and today I'm here to speak on my sister's behalf. Before I dig deeper into the topic, let's start with the word disability, because it can be a very broad umbrella term, and not everyone goes through the exact same experience that I had just described. Disabilities can be subdivided into 3 different categories: physical, intellectual, or sensory. Physical disabilities can be a limitation in movement, such as paralysis or amputation. Then there's the cognitive disabilities that I had just described, the difficulty understanding in both Down syndrome and autism. And lastly, defective sensations, such as blindness or deafness. Now that we're on the same page, let's define what disabilities are. They're impairments that affect a person's participation in society on an equal basis with others. But why are we not seen as equals? There's always 2 sides to each story. One that is trying to adapt, and then another that's constantly making it more difficult for others to do so. We have been setting those barriers, both physical and social. Physical barriers are the most visible ones, such as inaccessible buildings, transportation, or public spaces. However, social and attitudinal barriers can be equally, if not even more damaging. Stereotyping and discrimination can create an environment where people with disabilities feel oppressed, marginalized, their potential overlooked, their rights denied. It all follows the idea of ableism, the belief that we tend to see ourselves, the non-disabled, as default, and anything other than that is unwanted or undesirable. We tend to view people with disabilities as less valuable. There is no doubt that this is inhumane, but some of us don't recognize that we're behaving in an ableist way. So let's all take a step back, since apparently we play a major role in the problem. Let me ask you a very simple question. Do you think you're perfect? Do you think you're absolutely flawless? I know for a fact that we all have internal issues and conflicts that need to be resolved. But when it's someone with a disability, they tend to have that on display. Imagine yourself walking around with a sign that displays all your greatest weaknesses. Think about it. What's one thing you cannot do? Me, I'm not the best at math. One of you may not be so good at cooking. Another person with dyslexia isn't great at reading. And my sister cannot communicate. There's no doubt that all of these are basic survival skills, but they can also be learned behaviors. You're not good at something because you haven't had enough time, effort, resources, energy to be invested in getting better at this specific skill. Just because some of us face those extra obstacles in the way, that does not mean that it's impossible for them to reach their goals. In fact, why not reach even higher? Why not aim for the stars? I would consider it a bit of a controversial take, because people usually preach about setting realistic standards and goals. But what makes you think that we're less than any of those who made it? Let me take you on a journey and show you a few historical figures who have excelled at what they do. Starting with Helen Keller, the American author and political activist. If you didn't already know, Helen lost both her sight and her hearing at only the age of 19 months old. From then on, her teacher, Anne Sullivan, helped her to learn to communicate, and she eventually became the first deaf and blind person to earn a bachelor degree of arts. Helen continued her work traveled extensively, and gave lectures talking about her own disability from her own point of view. She even wrote a book called The Story of My Life, where she continued on to share her legacy with the world. Moving on to the realm of science is Stephen Hawking, the renowned physicist and cosmologist. Stephen had a condition that gradually paralyzed him over the years, starting from the age of 21. But despite his physical limitation, Stephen still continued to earn his PhD in theoretical physics and eventually became a professor at the University of Cambridge itself. Just like Helen, he continued to travel, he continued to give his lectures, and gave us insight into the nature of our own universe. He wrote several books, just like A Brief History of Time, and my personal favorite being The Grand Design. He's most famous for his works on black holes or the Big Bang Theory. He simplified those very complex scientific concepts into a manner that's accessible to the general public. Another honorable mention is Louis Braille, the French educator and inventor. And as the name suggests, he's the inventor of the Braille system, a pattern of raised dots representing both letters and numbers. Braille allowed blind individuals to read and write through touch. He not only came up with a solution to his own problem, but one that helped millions of people worldwide. Last but not least is Ludwig van Beethoven, the German composer and pianist, perhaps one of the greatest composers in the history of classical music. I was surprised to learn that he had progressive hearing loss starting from the age of 28 up till becoming completely deaf at the age of 44. He still continued his work. He composed one of his most famous, being the Ninth Symphony. All of these examples show us the power of determination in overcoming significant obstacles. They show us that disability was never really a barrier. Now this is Rana, my sister, and the person who has inspired me to be here today. As I mentioned earlier, she was diagnosed with autism as early as the age of 2 years old. From then on, she's been surrounded by what I would consider the most supportive family, more specifically my mother, who was there for her on every single step of the way. But unfortunately, I would not be able to say the same when it came to people outside the comfort of our own home. When they weren't patient enough, they did not understand her symptoms, so they did not know how to interact. People thought she's being overdramatic about her sensory issues, the sensitivity to both light and sound. They think she's rude when she cannot maintain eye contact, even though she's listening. They think that maybe I forgot what else she experiences because it's a lot of symptoms. But sometimes she does take things literally, exactly like how they're described. For example, when someone says, "time flies," she does not understand how something like time can grow a pair of wings and fly off like a bird. Rana loves her routine and hates when that changes. In fact, she's very observant to small changes. She has an attachment to certain objects and an intense interest in certain topics. But because autism is a very wide spectrum, some children show symptoms that Rana does not have, such as excessive body movements or fidgeting, perhaps talking in a flat, monotonous voice, or aggression as a form of self-expression simply out of frustration. All of these symptoms I listed increase people's confusion till they eventually give up. But I would not blame them when it's simply the lack of knowledge. But here, ignorance is not bliss, choosing to abandon the issue instead of finding ways to resolve it. But life was never all black and white. It's constant ups and downs. And Rana proved herself to me, not just academically, but by engaging in several hobbies. She's always had a passion for sports, music, and arts. After all that, people still don't see her potential like I do. They still don't think she's capable, no matter how much she proves to them that she in fact can. So let me share another personal story to give you a bit of insight. Just like any other student, Rana just graduated high school. And now we're on the lookout for university, applying for many faculties. We still got rejections. People refused to even meet her, thinking autism is hard to deal with. even though her scores in high school would clearly prove otherwise. The lack of communication simply creates this wall between Rana and the interviewer, leading them to believe that she cannot be a student at their university. But wait, is that it? Is that where the story ends? Of course not, because now the issue has been highlighted, we've seen prime examples of people succeed, but the problem still persists. So what can we do to change this? What is the next step forward? Remember those barriers I mentioned earlier, the physical and the social? Of course, changing the physical environment is essential, but I'm here to focus on altering our own views, that recognizing that every single one of us has a role, and it's important to understand our shared responsibility, creating an environment where everyone has the chance to live a fulfilling life. Start by understanding that people with disabilities are no less human than those without. So challenge the stereotypes, the myths, the misconception that the word disability just means less able. They may have a different way of living, they may learn things differently, but they're just as capable as we are. So treat them as your equals, listen to their perspectives, and empower them to make their own decisions and be as independent as possible. And here, patience is key. When a person with disability doesn't quite understand you, try to accommodate them. Maybe speak a little more clearly, use simpler words without having to pretend you're talking to a child, without having to feel pity for them. All they need is a chance. So we need to ask them more questions about their day, about their hobbies, about their life, anything really. Who doesn't love to talk about themselves and their interests? Don't be afraid to ask more questions about their disability itself. Many people would rather you ask the appropriate or respectful questions than just assume. Simply create more stereotypes and worsen the problem. After all, our goal is to create an inclusive community. So advocate for their rights to healthcare, education, and employment opportunities. A chance where everyone can live, can fulfill their goals. If you feel overwhelmed by all that, my advice would be do not overthink it. People with disabilities are just like you and I, so treat them like any other average person. It's as simple as putting a smile on your face and treating them with kindness. And here is where Rana's story truly ends. Or shall I say the start of a new beginning, when people finally gave her a chance and she got accepted into the University of Multimedia and Mass Communication. And as this talk is also coming to an end, all I want you to gather from me today is that people with disabilities should not be seen as what they cannot do, but instead what they do conquer and overcome. That the limits you see in others are limits you place yourself. So let's redefine this mentality and change the possibilities. Because the greatest disability is not in the body, but in the minds of those who underestimate others. Thank you.